Welcome everyone to our June edition of the ABA uh, Engineering webinar, and we put these together each month, usually on the third Tuesday of the month, and we have special guest speakers and with topics and information about would be of interest to broadcast engineers, both radio and television, hopefully to help you do your job better and more efficiently. And so I want to thank everybody for joining us an hour earlier. We had some scheduling issues. We worked that out. And so we were uh, good to see a lot of numbers of people signing on to the program today. This program is actually underwritten by John George, our good friend at RF Specialties. And if you have any need of any type of equipment from, I suppose, all the way from the microphone and the microphone flag all the way up to the beacon on top of the tower, then I encourage you to get a hold of John. You see his information there on the screen and give him a call. And when you do, make sure you tell him how much you appreciate him underwriting these. John is normally with us on these calls, but I think he's on the road somewhere traveling or maybe sitting at a Waffle House eating some biscuits this morning, but he couldn't make it today. But we appreciate his support in not only these webinars, but also the other activities of the ABA. We have, as most of you know, we have classes throughout the year for radio and television. And our next radio class is actually coming up in September, the latter part of September. And the television class is coming up the latter part of October. So if you're interested in either one of those classes, just go to our ABA website and we'll give you that information later in the program. Well, today we have a very special guest and a good friend of mine. We talk a lot about audio processing from time to time on these programming. And so I thought today we would sort of take a look at uh, how we got to where we are today in processing and what are we doing today and what's going to happen in the future. So with that being said, let me introduce our special guest, Frank Foti, who is with Telos Alliance. Frank, we appreciate you being with us today.
Well, Larry, I appreciate the opportunity to be with your group today. I see it's a nice list of people that are signed on. So good to see so many people, and I'm always honored to chat with your group and with you. So thank you for the opportunity once again.
Yeah, there's a lot we could talk about audio processing, but you and I have discussed it a little bit, and I think we sort of talked about this on a previous program about how it actually got started. And I think you were the one that made the statement that the very first processor that was ever used in radio broadcasting was this gentleman sitting at a console with a white lab coat on, with his hand on on a knob, and if it was too loud, he turned it down. If it was too soft, he turned it up. So I suppose that's sort of the way it got started.
You know, those of us that have been doing this for a while, we kind of joke and call that processing by Armstrong. You know, I realize Major Armstrong was pretty much the inventor of FM, but Armstrong, and yeah, it probably was. And excuse me, yeah, there was a time when the audio level was just whatever came out of the console was connected into the transmitter, and um, from what most of us are used to seeing on a modulation monitor today, where the mod meter is almost stuck at 100%. Back then, the mod meter almost replicated what the VU meter was doing on the audio console. So, occasionally you might see a peak that got up near 70, 80% because the fear of overmodulation was in everybody's hands. And then eventually, ideas came about with regard to coming up with ways of controlling peaks and maintaining uh, so basically maintaining the proper level of peak modulation.
Yeah, I think initially processing came about mainly to make sure that you complied with FCC rules
Yeah.
and regulations.
Yeah, and for most, for most folks, I think we think back and the organization that probably had devices in almost every radio station was CBS Labs, with the Audimax and the Volumax. And, the Volumax was basically there to make sure that you didn't overmodulate, provided some wideband limiting. And the Audimax was basically, the first step of trying to do automatic gain control. I mean, they both did it and they did it very well in that time frame. And then, from there, things kind of took off, if you will, in so many ways of like, audio processing took its vitamins and, people like Mike DeRoe and then, a respected colleague, Bob Orban and others got involved and, it's where we're at today.
Yeah, I suppose for a long time that was all that it was being used for. But I suppose as the time went along, and you can talk about this a little bit, program directors saw that they could actually begin to tailor the sound of their station to better suit what their format was to make them sound different than the guy down the street.
Well, yes, and to give, if from my vantage point, to give credit to I think where credit is due, a name that we need to all recognize is Mike DeRoe. Mike was working out in California, in Los Angeles, and got this idea of like, what if I split the audio into three different audio bands and apply some processing individually to each band, then sum everything back together and provide the final peak limiter, what would happen? And he did this on AM at first, and all of a sudden, it's like AM radio stations were burning a hole on the dial and obviously making a lot of program directors extremely happy. And one thing led to another, and multi-band audio processing was born. And and then other people came along and got involved, and you know, a lot's been learned, believe me, in the form of research with regard to not only dynamics control, but also in the how do we, provide peak limiting that provides the precision that's needed, but minimizes the annoyance that the ear hears.
Oh yeah, I think one of the things that I have been involved in probably longer than actual broadcast has been live audio and recording audio, and of course, processing is all done manually, sort of manually in the recording studio, but that's where all of that sort of falls into the same line. And I watch a lot of tutorials and talk to a lot of people that are mix engineers and work in live sound, and I find out that the topics and their procedures and all really mirror what we as broadcast engineers can do and need to be doing to clean up our audio. I know your friend and mine, Andrew Shep, once said that the best way to do it is to listen to a mix and listen to what's there that's not supposed to be there. And
Yeah.
I sort of use that in our class when we're talking about like setting up a processor or listening to your station. And I actually wrote an article that appeared in yesterday's newsletter that we send out about listening to your station, not just punching over to see if you're on the air, but listen to it. And as Andrew says, if you hear anything that's not supposed to be there, fix that first before you go and try to tailor the sound. And I'm sure you adhere to that as well.
Actually, Larry, I do. And, a combination of, like if I roll the clock back a number of years to when I was, in a radio station, the I was always critically listening to our off-air signal. And what I would do is I would try to identify what was bothering me the most. Was it like in the EQ? Um, was it distortion? Was it intermod? What have you? And whatever was annoying me the most, even I would address that first. And by the way, there could have been three or four things. And this is why I try to tell people, don't go making too many adjustments all at once because you have no idea what those adjustments are doing. Identify what's bothering you the most, address that. It might just be, by example, it might be, if it's like an urban or a CHR station, you're hearing some occasional bass distortion. Well, okay, let's get that fixed first. Once you're happy with that, then you take that off the list. Then it's like, now what? And slowly as you get down the list, if at some point if you wake up and you turn the radio on and go, wow, I'm not hearing anything that I'm annoyed with, then you stop and you leave it alone. And by the way, not only did I do that when I worked in the radio station, but as we design processing either algorithms or parameters or features for our products, that's exactly what I do. It's like, what's bothering me the most? Fix that first. Then what? Fix that. And then at some point, and I call it the sleep on it method. At some point, if I get up the next day and I'm still happy with it, I stop. That's it. The pizza is baked, ready to eat.
Yeah, that's right. And I mentioned Andrew Chef a while ago, and that's what he says. He says you'll find a point where you don't hear anything anymore that doesn't supposed to be
Stop.
there, and
Leave it
that way
alone.
you're just about through then when you get to that point. The other thing that sort of fits into that, I like to when I was full time in broadcasting, and I share this in the classes. Listen to how the different elements of your program uh, switches in between. You can have a good sounding station, but if the different elements that your station has switching between music, speech, commercials, news, whatever it happens to be, it needs to flow and blend together and not one be too loud and one too soft.
Oh yeah, actually, um, you know, a current activity that's going on within our little playground is, we're in the beta test process of our new product Omnia 12, and some of our team that those are the things that they'll lock on. Now they'll come running up to my office and go, I just segued from this Sophie Tucker song to the Talking Heads and listen to the way the guitar, blah blah blah, and part of me wants to throw my hands up and think you're trying to make a mountain out of a molehill, but I also know that there are broadcasters that want that to be right, and if you want to have a world class product or do world class work, those are the things you have to address. So you're right, Larry. Getting those elements all prop, and sometimes it may not be in the processing. It might be within the facility. Sometimes, one of the things I have and help people with is they'll get the processing working and they're happy and they'll say, but the jocks don't sound right. Okay, well, are you running mic processing? Yeah, we are. How's it set up? Maybe, now if you've adjusted your audio processing or put in a new system, you may have to go back and take a look at how the mic processing is set up. Or if you don't have mic processing, you may need to consider adding it. So yes, getting all the elements correct is important.
Yeah, there's an acrostic that I heard a while back, and it was said, "Get it right at the source," and that applied. I heard that at a seminar on mixing live audio, but they said before you do anything, make sure every source is correct.
Yeah.
Because if you don't, you're going to be fighting it the rest of the time. And I think that's true in radio as well. You got to make sure whether your programming is coming in from a satellite or an FTP site or locally generated, make sure that's right first before you start doing anything else.
Many years ago, and obviously I'm going to be dating myself since, I was around in the time of the caveman. Um, you know, I remember reading an essay, a broadcast essay about um, that if, like how often, in a radio station, how often were you changing the styluses on turntables? And I, at the time I was working at WMMS here in Cleveland, very well-known album rock station. And I never thought about it. I mean, I, and it recommended that if you're playing records, that the styluses needed to be changed, like I think once every 3 months. And I'm thinking, oh my God, but it was right. And I remember we had one turntable that I never understood why. It seemed like every third song just didn't sound right because they had three turntables in the studio. And sure enough, replaced all the styluses and all those problems went away. So you're right, Larry. I mean, you have to pay attention to all the stuff with, insofar as the source. And I realize today the sources are, audio files, for the most part. And again, if we're going to speak of that, you want to make sure that those audio files are going to be the best quality possible. If you're playing MP3s at 128 kilobits, well, you're going to run the risk of, giving up some audio quality that's going over the air.
I heard a program director just really got all over a board op one time because he played something, and the program director come running into the control room and said, "What in the world are you playing?" He said, "Well, this is a brand new song that's just been introduced, and I got it down off the web, but it's an MP3." He said, "Yeah, but it sounds pretty good." He said, "Well, by itself it may sound good, but when you mix it with all the wave files, it doesn't sound right. So you got to pay attention to that."
Yep.
The other thing that we sort of see when we're talking about that is to make sure that you go through your system and make sure it's gain staged correctly. I mean, you normally in a broadcast facility, your audio can go through various devices, and you don't really want it to be one level coming out of this one and another level coming out of that one as it goes through the chain. So I think it's very important to go through and levelize and make sure all the levels, because I heard somebody say one time and I thought about it. I said, well, I guess that's really a true statement. From the source material all the way to the input of the transmitter, the level should be the same no matter where you go in your facility, and
Agreed.
you don't have this up and down problem.
Larry, that's an excellent point. And I'd like to address it in two domains. We'll start with the analog domain. If your plant is analog, what you want to make sure is that you want to identify which device in the transmission path has the least amount of headroom. And
Hmm.
you need to make sure that everything is calibrated so that whatever the clipping point is in that device is going to basically be, you know, you want everything calibrated to that so that, if the board is calibrated to +4 and the clipping point is +24, okay, you want to make sure that everything through the chain is set for that the clipping point is +24. Likewise, in the digital domain, remember, in the digital domain, there's no forgiveness. 0 dB full scale is 0 dB full scale. There is no +4 0 dB full scale. So you want to make sure that everything is calibrated to 0 dB, to whatever the full scale level is. And that way, then you can rest assured that whatever the metering is on the audio console is going to be the same level ballistics going all the way through the transmission path and to the input of the audio processor. If you get that right, then basically, it's like insurance.
One of the things that television seems to do a really good job of that radio doesn't do a very good job of, and that is have a plant drawing. And I go into a lot of TV stations and they have a nice CAD drawing or whatever, either on the wall or wherever it is, where you see every piece of equipment that your programming stream goes through. And this is very important, even in radio. And I tell people it doesn't have to be anything fancy. You don't have to buy CAD software or whatever. Just draw your on a piece of paper, just draw it out and make a little box for everything the audio goes through on the way to the transmitter. And one thing that will do, like you were talking about, you can go and pull the manual on each piece of equipment that your audio goes through and look and see what the clip level is. And like you just said, you may be going through there and everything says clip level plus 24, and all of a sudden you see one that's plus 20 is the clip level. Well, that becomes your maximum level that you can run. It doesn't matter
Right.
what all the rest of it is.
That's
And
right.
so you have to do that to make sure you don't go through. The other thing I find that's neat, and it's sort of funny, that sometimes you'll find a piece of equipment. Maybe you took over for somebody that'd been there a lot of many years. You may find a piece of equipment and you look at it and it's not really doing anything as far as the quality of the audio or the efficiency of the operation. My comment is take it out of the chain. That's just another single point of failure if it's not adding to the quality or the efficiency. So I encourage people in radio to do a plant drawing and go through and set the levels the way the manual says they're supposed to be set for the clip level.
Larry, that's an excellent point. And I think part of it is that, when you think about it, the discipline in television requires like a lot of block drawings, because of all the amount of equipment that's involved in the television plant. And I think what ends up happening in radio is that many of us have it in our heads. But I will say that over the years, I recall being in some of the, let's say, what were like the old network, we used to call the network O&O radio stations. A lot of them did have block diagrams because a lot of it was built by TV engineers, and there's a lot to be said, a lot to be said for doing as you just described.
Let's talk a little bit about, and you touched on it briefly earlier, that when you install a processor, you can select one of the presets. And uh, now, with the advancement of all the technology, a lot of the presets or processes is exactly the way you want the station. But if you do want to do some tweaking a little bit, I know you've talked about this before. You and I have talked about it. There's a right and wrong way to go in and start. I don't want to say tweaking, but getting the exact sound that you want. And talk about that just a little bit, and how important it is. One is having a good monitor system where you can actually listen to your station. And and I always tell people when you start doing that, don't really pay any attention to your competition. You're not adjusting to match them. You're adjusting for your audience. So don't just make your sound is the way you want it. But there are some other little techniques about how you adjust processors to make it sound the way that you want it, and the procedures that you go through. Talk about that a little bit.
Sure. Well, it's almost like a double-edged sword because one, the competition is always on the mind of the program director and the disc jockeys and the engineers. It was always on forefront of my mind. It was, probably because, excuse me, probably because I'm somewhat competitive in nature and Sicilian. It's like we want to win at everything, right? So I was always had a goal of like, we're going to be the best sounding station on the dial no matter what. Now, that said, and to your question, I always start with, in today's world with most products, you can pull up a preset and hopefully you pull something up that is designed more along the lines of the direction you want to go. It might be formatics or what have you. But but most people are going to say, yeah, but there's some things we'd like to be a little different. What I recommend people do is again, write out a list of the areas you want to address and prioritize them. A lot of times, I can't tell how many times in my early days of being in business where I would consult. I'd go in and we'd work with some radio station, and they'd always say, "We got to sound good, got to sound good." We'd get them sounding good, and in the back of my mind, I always said, and I know the last thing they're going to say, "Can we get it a little louder?" Which they did, but the idea is prioritize down what needs to be addressed. And if it's loudness, well, okay, there's parameters to address for loudness. And in many products today, rather than going in and trying to tweak on all the little, minute functions, because most products today have what 50 to 100 different parameters you could adjust. A lot of products today have these, we have a thing called quick tweak. I know our friends over at Orban, they have the less more knob. Start there and see if that can help get you where what you need to do. Ours isn't just a simple knob. I think there's like three or four areas that it'll adjust, like if it has to do with like bass or loudness or density or um, you know, uh, sorry guys, the jaw isn't working well today. Yeah, our quick tweak has, I think, like four different sections that address four different areas with respect to processing. So, by example, if the first thought was, we want to fatten up the low end, well, then start there. And if it gets you in the ball game, great. If not, then you can go to like the expert mode and start working on that. But and I'd say the other thing is before you start doing this, have some understanding what the device is capable of doing. Meaning you're not going at it blind in the sense of like, oh, on the air, what does this knob do? And you adjust something and all of a sudden you're not sure why something went up or down. So have some at least prior experience, maybe playing with the device off air, in a self setup monitored area, test setup, so that you have a comfort level of how the device is going to respond when it comes time to making processing adjustments. But a couple other quick things that are critical. One, Larry's right. Have a known monitoring system that you're comfortable with, and that you can rely on. And I don't recommend it being the GM's radio in his Cadillac. Have something that's your reference monitor. I always had, I always refer back to my days at Z100 or even at WMMS. We had a very well set up monitoring system in the shop where that was the reference. And yes, we listened in cars and on portable radios and things of that nature, but all the critical work was done where we could hear it on that monitor. The other thing is make sure that there is one elected person who's going to make the final decision. If you're going to say, oh, we're going to use a committee to adjust processing, that's crazy. I mean, that's like, that's insanity. That's like expecting something different to happen, when you're doing the same thing again and again. You need to have one person that's going to make the final say. Could be the program director, could be the chief engineer, might be the general manager, but it does need to be one person. Of course, there's probably going to be input from others, may be good, may not be good, but one person has to, stand out and be the final say so in the process.
Yeah, it's as we know, everybody's hearing is different. Everybody hears things differently than others, and I've had discussions with audiologists. As a matter of fact, I had one that actually has made my hearing aids that I've got had to switch over to hearing aids because I was actually in a car wreck several years ago that someone decided not to stop at the stop sign. It wasn't meant for them, and they plowed into my car, and it messed up my left ear. But anyway, I was talking to him about it. He said, "Yeah," he said, the human ear is different. From you get 20 people in there, and you're going to have 21 different ideas of how
Yep.
it's a sound.
Yep.
So I noticed somebody just posted on the chat, and I agree with this 100%, both in the live audio realm and also in broadcasting. Usually, less is more.
Agreed.
You can get too fancy with stuff and just put too much stuff in there, and at the end of the day, it's just a jumbled up mess.
You know, something that I've shared with people throughout the years, and I'm going to share it again. And it addresses the less. And by the way, I'm in an agreement of less is more. And it comes down to something that I call the hot water trick. And when you take audio processing and you crank it up, you know, I realized we had a fun play on the Spinal Tap movie of, it goes to 11, but for the guys that are saying I want to go, to 15, and it's so packed up or constipated sounding, I call remember, the ear needs to breathe. There's a sensitivity in the ear, just as there's a sensitivity in my finger that, and go do the following. Go in the kitchen or the bathroom, turn on the hot water and let it get really, really, really hot. Okay. And if you take your finger and you stick it under the hot water, and leave it there, the first few seconds, it's going to be really hot. Then the nerves are going to get desensitized. It's not going to feel hot anymore, right? But if you then, wait a few minutes, let your finger get back to normal, take it and pulse your finger against that hot water stream, it's going to feel hot every time. Okay. The analogy is less is more. If we're not hammering the processing so that so that the mod monitor looks like a current, like the current meter on the transmitter, you want the ear wants to breathe a little bit. And again, I'm going to say this, and I go on record of saying it. And I see Barry's on the line, and I think I told this story on a chat with his group back in the day. Roll the clock back 40 some years to the days of Z100. People used to always say that Z100 sounded louder than WPLJ. Electrically, WPLJ was louder. Why? Because the RMS was buried. It was like sticking your finger under that hot water and leaving it there. The ear just got desensitized when you hit 95.5. And I'm not trying to pick on WPLJ. They're a friend station and a good customer. But when you hit Z100, those dynamics made it sound louder. And every time it's like you'd go to 100.3 and it had, matter of fact, I have an ex-wife who used to laugh at me because I used to say that the sound of Z100 was analogous to the way Roger Daltrey explained the sound of the Who, or he would explain the sound of the Who. It was like being punched in the nose and somebody saying, "I love you," and that's how it worked, because there was there was some dynamics that was applied, and it comes back to the less is more adage.
There's another mix engineer, and I keep referring back to live audio because it mirrors broadcasting so well. And you may be familiar with him, Chris Lloyd Alge, who is a Grammy-winning mix engineer, and he says the same thing. He said he'll be mixing a record, but he only mixes for like 15 or 20 minutes at a time because the ear has automatic gain control, and to some point sort of equalization, and it changes if you listen too long at a too loud a level, and he will only mix 15 or 20 minutes, and then he'll get up and go and do something else to let the ear return to what it's supposed to be, because he said your ears will trick you into thinking, just like you said, the difference in PLJ and the zoo is that your ears will get acclimated to a different level and dynamic range, and it'll play tricks on you.
Larry, it's interesting you say that, because that's something that I've always done. When I'm futzing around with this stuff, um, I'll play with it for about 15, 20 minutes, and then I got to stop because I have to let my ears decompress. I may go do some email or go do something else or what have you, go get some iced tea. and then I come back and two things happen. One, the air decompresses, but then two, it reestablishes my frame of reference. And a lot of times, if I'm working on something really critical, that helps because I'll come back and I'll go, now I'm hearing something or I'm not hearing something, and it helps, put the frame of reference where it needs to be.
I heard a story one time about a guy that was at work and he got through and he got in his car and was driving home and was playing the radio and had it set to a comfortable level. Got home, parked the car, went in and ate dinner with his family and slept and all, and got up the next morning and hopped in the car and turned the car on, and the radio like to knocked him out of the car. He said, "Who's been messing with my radio?" Well, nobody. Coming home with all the traffic noise and car horns and stuff, he had adjusted the level where it sounded good to him. But then the next morning, his ears had returned to normal sensitivity, and it sounded way too loud.
Yeah, and again, Larry, that's why I think it's in all our manuals. It's been there forever. It's something I call the sleep on it method. You play and you work and you tweak, and then nine times out of ten, say that sounds good. You go home, you get up next day and go, oh my God, what did I do? And at some point, if you get up the next day and you're still liking what you're hearing, again, that's at the point where you realize lock it in. As we used to have this phrase in New York that said, lock it in and rip the knob off. When you can get up the next day and you don't feel you need to make any more adjustments, lock it in and rip the knob off because you got there.
One of the little sidelights that people uh, don't really think about is when you're doing adjusting to anything like that, don't be messing with the monitor level. Leave the knob alone. I've often told people, I said, I wish monitor amps didn't have a knob. They could had something inside and you could set that and leave it alone. But people are constantly turning the speaker levels up and down, and that completely throws your reference off.
Yep, it does. It does.
So, I mean, that just, then you don't know where you are or what you did before. One of the things, and we'll touch on this briefly and then move on. Hopefully, the loudness war that we experienced many years ago is over.
Larry, I'm only interrupting because I see a comment here from Dan, and it's a very good point. And my late friend Mark Driscoll, where would do this, where he would set his monitor level at a very, very low level,
Right.
and I'll never forget this. It was from Mark Driscoll who I learned this from. I'd go into a market and work with Mark, and we'd be driving around in a car, and he'd be talking to me, and you could barely hear the station. I'm like, Mark, aren't we gonna, he's Frank, you got it. And I once asked him, he said, Frank, the ear is, locking in a lot better when I have the level set very low. So, Dan, thank you very much. That's a great point and something that a lot of people should consider and try.
That's exactly right. Referring back to the guy I mentioned, Chris Lloyd Alge, he said when he's mixing, his level is so low, he can actually hear the guy typing on his iPad sitting next to it.
Yep.
He said occasionally I'll bring it up just to see how the bass is sitting, but I return it back to my known level and never touch it while you're mixing because it completely throws your reference off. I want to watch our time because I know you got to get away to go to another meeting. Uh, Talk a little bit about the new product that you guys are working on and what some of the, if you can share it, some of the new
Sure.
features that y'all are planning on implementing in the new version.
Thank you. We at NAB 2026, we debuted Omnia 12, which will be the new flagship audio processor from Telos Alliance. There's a number of things that are new about it. It's always been my view that we don't just take the older product, put it in a new chassis, throw in a few utility items, and call it brand new. So in the audio processing area, the dynamic section is basically been further enhanced. The stuff that Cornelius Gould had helped develop, which was part of the G-Force platform in Omni 11, that's been further augmented with some additions to the algorithms. And the other area that I'm excited about is because one of the things that I'm always trying to do is what can we do to not only enable the product to remain competitive on the dial, which I know is the loudness word. And I'm not here to try to sell loudness, but I know broadcasters, they need to be there. But how do we maintain the competitive level, but improve not, and it's more than just the fidelity, but the ease of listening. And one of the things I was able to do was I spent a lot of time, a little bit during the whole COVID period, researching what brings about the annoyance to the ear. And the biggest thing that I came to find is intermodulation distortion. In simple terms, IM distortion in a processor can easily be described as, oh, we're running the limiters, with time constants that are too fast. That's that busy, packed up sound that one can hear. More so, and while we've addressed a lot of that, more so the back end, what we call the final limiter or the clipper, IM distortion does occur there. The simple one that most of us are probably familiar with is like bass frequencies taking and shoving the mid-range presence and highs into the clipper, and you get annoyances that it doesn't sound like harmonic distortion, but like just something that doesn't sound natural or musical anymore. I was able to do a lot of work that fell out of a different project that I'd worked on, which was this up mixer that takes stereo and turns it into surround sound. Because I was doing a lot of work in the frequency domain, I started to apply some frequency domain methods to audio clipping. And I was able to achieve a lot of benefit in further reducing harmonic distortion. The challenge was that the IM distortion wasn't reduced to my satisfaction. So I basically stole some, let's say, philosophy of what goes on in the frequency domain and did a replication of some of that in the time domain. And lo and behold, I was able to achieve the ability to further reduce clipping-induced intermod distortion. Now, you're probably going to think, Frank, you're using a lot of big words. What do I get in the benefit? And here's the thing. It makes the audio easier to listen to. Thus far, we're in beta test right now. We're on the air in a number of markets here in the United States and abroad. And the feedback has been, wow, the audio sounds easier to listen to. It's cleaner and it's more open. Now, why is this such a benefit? Because as we know in radio, what do we want? We want people to not only lock it in, but we want them to listen for as long as possible. And I think one of the things that, a lot of us, myself included, probably have not paid enough attention to is how much has the signal processing system done to possibly push listeners away because of too much density or not realizing that there's things going on that we can't necessarily put our finger on. And one of the things I heard right away was, wow, this is so easier. It's much easier to listen to. So that's one of the key pieces in Omnia 12. The other part is, and a lot of it is what I call like what I refer to as like the accessories or the utility items. We needed to be able to have all the features with regard to, HLS plus in and out. It has a backup playout system. God forbid your feed from the studio goes away. It has full RDS. It has streaming capabilities where you can have stream. It'll do multiple HD radio feeds. There's a lot of utility items in it. Even like measuring, it's got spectrum analyzer, oscilloscope. Guys, I don't have my cheat sheet in front of me, so I'm just trying to pull from memory. And the other thing too, and this isn't on the sound part, but on the business side, we know that we needed to make the product become cost competitive with everything else in the marketplace, and we've done that. And so we're pretty excited about it. It's based on the company we've created these audio engines. We call it Engine Core, and everything's based on running in this Engine Core, which gives us a platform that can be used for processing or mixing or codecs or things of that nature. Other big piece. It does have, if you're running, if you're in a PPM market, you can license and have the PPM encoder in the audio processor. So it does have that as well. So there's a lot of stuff that's in Omnia 12. It's in size, it's half the size of Omnia 11. It's 2RU in size, and it'll begin shipping, I believe, I want to say mid-July. So let's say Santa's elves are busy as we speak, getting units ready at the Telos Alliance. And if you have interest, reach out to whomever your representative is with regard to, either demoing a unit or getting a unit or what have you. So Larry, off the top of my head, because I don't want to turn it into a commercial, which I try not to do, but those are, let's say, the big bullet points with respect to Omnia 12.
Yeah, you mentioned something that caught my attention in talking about intermodulation distortion. A lot of times people hear things and they can't really put their finger on it. And if you drill down in the inside, that's where a lot of it is. And I like to say that the sounds too busy. I mean, that's a layman's term, but there's just too much going on in there, and not necessarily the program material you're putting in there, but extra things that get created by clipping, like in a modulation distortion, and it causes it to be too busy, and the ear sort of responds to that, and the brain does talk. It tries to figure out why it sounds that way, and so it cuts down on time spent listening because the ear and the brain gets sort of tired, I guess is the way I like to explain it.
Uh, um, uh, Larry, not only I couldn't agree more. But I'm so passionate about this topic that I wrote a little essay on it. It's on the website, on the Telos Alliance website under audio processing, and I'll share a quick story about what pointed me in this direction. I was doing some work on the new clipping system, which, by the way, is the whole new clipping system is running in the stereo generator. It's, the left-right clipping is derived from it. So when you have this system on the air, you'll see your modulation peaking at 100%, but those left-right meters are going to be dancing up around 130, 140%, and that's legal. But when I was doing some work, I was critically listening to for whatever reason, my ears are very adept at transients. And the song Babylon, excuse me, Babylon Sister by Steely Dan, the opening of that song are these tom-tom hits that go boom, 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 boom. And they're so well recorded. Their recording engineer was just, he was amazing. And as I was listening to him through this FFT-based clipping system, the transients were getting lost. And some of it was intermod, some of it was based on how the FFT works. And it was bothering me. And so it sent me off on this new area of research where, what eventually became the new clipping system in Omnia 12, such that when you play Babylon Sister or something with good transients, they're perfectly, they're transparent. I play it now, it goes boom, 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 boom. And then the bass guitar comes in. Roger Nichols, he was the recording, he was the main engineer brains behind Steely Dan. And so when I got everything working, when I would compare that, because I would test the new clipping system up against the Omni 11's clipping system by running the Omni 11 dynamics into the new clipping system, it just sounded smoother. It just sounded, and I don't say smoother, but when I don't say it was like it was easier to listen to. So I started playing other pieces of audio that like were important to me. Some of it was Steely Dan, some of it was other well-recorded material that had a lot of dynamics to it. And it was just like almost like a breath of fresh air and listening to it. And so I'll wrap this part of my rant, if you will, by I didn't say much about this aspect of the system to any of our people. But as they started hearing it, Paul Kriegler, who represents Omnia here in the States, and my buddy Max Pandini over in Italy, they came back. They said, Frank, I don't know what's going on, but the audio just sounds easier to listen to. And then it hit me because, remember, folks, we could debate processing to the end of time, but it's also a very emotional experience. And when things can grab you and hold you in an emotional manner, positively or negatively, then you're onto something, good or bad. And the a person that put me onto the whole audio and emotion thing is another recording engineer friend of mine, Frank Filippetti. I was doing some work with Frank on an up mixer, and he came to me and he said, Frank, he said, the up mix is great, the surround is great, but I'm emotionally drawn into whatever the hell it is you're doing. And we've had that comment from people now. They're saying, wow, it just sounds beautiful. And so, I'm not trying to sit here and sell it to you guys, but if you do start playing with it and you listen to it, hopefully you'll come away with, hopefully the light bulb will go on for you. And if so, thank you very much.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%. And one of the things we always try to stress when I'm talking to other engineers, the engineer is the final guy in the station that packages a program and gets it out to the public. But the way that you want to get it to the public, so as you say, it invokes a positive response when they hear it.
Right. And again, if it's a positive response and it's easier to listen to, subliminally, they'll listen longer. Look, I agree. Look, I understand. People are tuning into a radio station because, hey, I want to listen to sports talk, or I want to listen to top 40, or I want to listen to country. But once they're there, you want to keep them as long as possible. And given the state of the world and the challenges in our industry right now, I mean, people have so many things to choose from. We want to provide as good a product to the listener as possible. So so I now take it as it's part of my job, as a designer and as our company to deliver a product that'll enable the broadcaster to deliver the best product to their listeners as possible. And if they're able to do that and people are able to listen longer, guess what? If they're listening longer, the ratings go up, hopefully the sales go up too, and everybody wins.
Yeah, that's exactly true. I know you got to get away early to go to another meeting. Just touch on one thing briefly here.
Larry, I've got a couple of minutes here yet.
Okay. One thing I wanted you to touch on, and that is so many stations now are streaming and they're running HD channels in FM, but they're also streaming over the internet. And you mentioned briefly, I think, on the not just on the new processor, but on the others, the importance of having different configurations for the streams than what you do for the main channel.
Very important. One thing to just, I'll make it simple. Audio codecs, no matter what bit rate, they don't like audio clippers and they don't like preemphasis. which is the boost of the high frequencies that happens in FM stereo, as well as, we have pre-emphasis even in AM now. So you need to use a processor that's dedicated for streaming, because one of the things, especially if you're um, in a situation where you need to use moderate to low bit rates, you want to have a final limiter that's able to condition the audio so that you're going to get maximum audio quality through that low bit stream. And so, yes, the back end limiting system in all our Omnia processors, not just the 12 or the 11, but the 9 does it too. And I think, and if you were to set up like a Volt for streaming, the final limiting system is designed specifically for audio codecs, and that's critical.
Yeah, it's so many of the streaming services now, and the unfortunate thing about some of the streaming services, they're always changing. They're changing
Yep.
bit rates, or they're changing the true peak level, what they want it to be fed at, and so you sort of have to keep a watch on that to stay up to date. And if you're too loud, they'll bring you down. If you're too low, they'll bring you up, and it's just
I chuckle because a number of years ago, I know the AES, they eventually published a recommended standard for um, um, streaming. And I remember I used to sit in some of these meetings, and guys, you can ask people in my company. I like a meeting like this because we're chewing on good stuff, right? I don't do well in meetings where people are wringing their hands, and people were like debating, is it minus 14? Is it minus 12? Blah, 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 blah. And I'm thinking, Jesus, if you've got the right dynamics control, you could pretty much have it set to whatever the heck you want it to be, and it's going to do well. So, like anything, if you understand the medium and the transmission path, if it's a stream or over the air, and you understand it well enough, and you know how to apply the proper devices for that transmission medium, you're going to have a quality product, guaranteed, guaranteed. So, if you're wondering, did I stay in that AES group? Hell no. I better use of my time, either doing audio work or the other side of my life, which has a lot to do with, old things like burning coal and steam locomotives.
yeah, we could talk all day about your
No
choo-choo
problem.
trains, but we don't have time. One final question: your thoughts on the positive or negative aspects of using LUFS?
Well, I think I think it's a positive. It's been implemented. Um, um, it's been implemented very well, and it's something that if you adhere to it, you shouldn't have any problems.
Do you feel like that may? I know in Europe they've sort of adopted that as a standard, and is that something you see in the United States that might be coming down the pike?
Well, Europe, and with all due respect, especially being an Italian Sicilian, all due respect to my countrymen, they love to like wring their hands on stuff. I mean, LUFS, the BS 412 MPX, power thing. I think, those, I, what's that phrase? You know, a problem in search of a solution or something like that. I may be having it backwards. Again, folks, if you employ good engineering practices, a lot of these regulations are probably overkill. So, I respect it by being a colleague in the industry, but I'm also an outlier and somebody who at times has been known to break the rules.
Right. Well, Frank, sure appreciate your time, and we could just go
I
on and on and
appreciate
on with
all of
this
you, and
topic.
I see there were a lot of questions that came in. I apologize not being able to get to a lot of them. And if need be, if you'd like some dedicated answer, you can find me, Frank at, or no, I'm sorry, frank.foti telosalliance.com. Send me email and I'll be happy to answer your questions.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much. And
Thank
we
you.
appreciate you being with us today.
Take care, everybody.
Okay. And we will, just as a side note, this is actually being recorded and it will be available on our uh, the YouTube site for ABA. Oh, I went too far on my slide PowerPoint here, but we've got there's our site right there. You can go to youtube.com, ABA Engineering, and you'll be able to watch this again. Or people that didn't make it, we'll be happy to have it. We should have it up there in probably sometime tomorrow. So make sure you do that. Our next webinar will be on July 21st. So make a note of that, and we should be back to our regular time for that one at 10 a.m. So we want to thank everybody for joining us, and if you have any questions to me, just there's my email address and the ABA website. If you want to find out more about our radio and television classes, just go to al-ba.com and click on engineering, and it will have all the information about the classes and the schedule. So thank everybody for watching, and we'll see you next month.